Good evening, and welcome to the March. Good evening. Welcome to the March 25th, 2025 meeting of the Carrboro Town Council. This is a council work session this evening, which means there will be no formal action taken, no votes, and no public comment. And I will turn it over to Town Manager Tony, who will introduce the item for the evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Today we have a work session focused on housing, some about affordable housing, and some opportunities for the town to consider various options to move the needle on our affordable housing goals. Our housing director, Ms. Anne Marie Bonneman, will do the presentation. She'll have some recommendations at the end and open it up for questions.
All right, welcome, Anne Marie.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. So to provide a foundation for your work session tonight, I'm going to cover three topics. The first is going to be community indicators, delivering the latest housing information and housing affordability. The second will be looking at our tools and strategies that we currently use. And I'll end with three recommendations for advancing the town's affordable housing goals. But before we get into that, I'd like to present the staff recommendation for the town's parcels on Pathway Drive and Crest Street. So if you recall, the first step in the town's adopted process for examining town land for affordable housing use is to evaluate the properties, to determine if the conditions of the property are feasible for housing or not. The town contracted Summit Design and Engineering to study the parcels on Pathway Drive and Crest Street, and last June they presented their report to you. The report was very detailed, and I think you have that in your packet, but for brevity, I'm going to just summarize the very general findings of the properties. The findings of the assessment showed that both properties had substantial rocket slope. They had streams, water, and sewer easements present. They provided habitat for endangered species, namely bats. And in the staff review, all felt that the stormwater impact analysis was incomplete. In addition, they looked at what land could be buildable. For Crest Street, it's very small, 0.26 acres, and for Pathway Drive, 3 acres. And we are cautioned that the estimates, these are estimates only, and they are likely higher than what might actually be developable. We also learned that more exploration would be needed to estimate the cost of development. Additionally, an expensive stormwater management system may be required to achieve density. And looking far ahead, and this was an issue that was raised by Habitat for Humanity, is to think about the homeowner association fees to maintain the system. That could have long-term financial impact on low-income households. Given all of these factors, I think it's reasonable to assume that the potential cost of development may exceed the value of this investment, even with land donation and maximum density. I do want to reiterate the land, I think as Councilmember Now had said, this is doable, but it may not be desirable. But at this time, I feel like no further exploration for the Pathway and Crest properties is needed, and we should not pursue concept plans. Instead, I think we need to turn our attention and our resources to our other town properties in our inventory, to look at them again, and also to evaluate the criteria that we have used to evaluate those properties. I think I would also like to see us poised to act on opportunities as they arise. We're working right now on land banking prospects with Central Pines and the Orange County Affordable Housing Coalition. And we're also having ongoing discussions with affordable housing partners, some residents, as well as UNC. Moving on to community indicators, rental housing. The HUD 25 figures for fair market rent are $1,872 for a 2-bedroom apartment. This is not a luxury apartment. This is a very basic 2-bedroom apartment. However, the household income needed would be a housing wage of $36 an hour or an annual income of almost $75,000. As you can see by some sample average salaries for firefighters, teachers, and childcare workers, this is not feasible. And overall, 55% of all Orange County renters are cost burdened. Turning to home ownership, I'm using similar data as to the rental, just to keep it in perspective. This data is coming from the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, but it is based on the HUD metro area figures, and this is from January 2025. The median home price is $433,500. And the income needed to afford this is $132,553. And by afford, that means spending no more of their annual income on housing costs, including utilities. The problem is the actual median income in our area is only $86,336 for a family of 4. That creates a gap between the qualified and actual income of 53.5%, or 1.54 times the actual income. Now, Carrboro is, of course, higher. Looking at statistics within the month of January from one source, the median home sale for Carrboro was $611,000. So clearly, we have quite more of an issue that we're facing in Carrboro. Looking at additional pressures on housing affordability, escalating construction costs have been huge. It's even affecting low-income housing tax credit properties, which I'll explain later on. We have a limited supply of existing housing, especially for people who are trying to buy their first-time home. We have some serious land constraints. We often face insufficient subsidy, and what that could look like could be too few vouchers than what the community needs. It could be landlords who do not want to accept vouchers, or it could be that subsidy that's needed to help a homeowner get into a mortgage to fill that gap that's there. Gentrification and property taxes. We all know that the properties are being revaluated, and they are estimated to be at least 50% higher than what we've heard. And this will particularly impact our older fixed-income homeowners who have been here for a very long time. And then finally, high energy costs and older existing housing. If in a mobile home, for instance, that is poorly insulated, they could be looking at extremely high energy bills. Even though that rent for that unit is affordable, the energy cost to maintain their life there is not. Now we want to look at severe cost burden by race and ethnicity in Orange County. Looking at the county as a whole, it's not surprising to see that mixed race, Native American, and Black households are suffering the most severe cost burden. But do note that all the communities of color are experiencing higher rates of cost burden than white households. And one factor contributing to this is that in general, BIPOC households are earning less than their white counterparts and have a even harder time finding housing that would fit within their budget. So Carrboro's housing gap was defined during our comprehensive plan process. It found that we are 1,079 units short to filling that gap at that time. For homeowners, that was 314 homes for households who are making under $75,000 and 765 units for households who are making under $25,000. So what tools do we have to use to try to advance our affordable housing goals? We have funding. That can be local government funding, federal and state sources, which of course are very vulnerable right now, private foundations, employers, and other partnerships that we can develop with our affordable housing partners. Land, whether it's publicly owned land, the land trust, or through land banking for future developments. And then finally, zoning. We have a comprehensive plan. That's a great start, and we are engaging in a UDO rewrite project that could improve the situation greatly. So strategies for using our tools. We've identified 2 ways to increase affordable housing. It's to preserve what we have and to produce new housing. This applies to both rental and ownership housing, and depending on the type of housing, the affordability goals differ. The goal for ownership is to create homeowner wealth, while the goal for rental is to sustain ongoing affordability. And depending on the goal, there are a variety of strategies that we can use or we have used. So if you look at the far right column, housing production for rental housing, a couple of examples. Zoning, by using conditional zoning, a municipality can often have some leverage in working with the developer to add some affordable units to the development that they're working on. And this is particularly important within areas that have only a voluntary request for affordable housing. Low-income housing tax credit properties, this is hands down the fastest way to add units to a community. The one rising issue with that is that over the last 10 years or so, the amount of gap financing required from a local government to make these projects work has been going up steadily over the years, and it's directly related to construction costs. If we see changes in the LIHTC program, that could also affect using LIHTC as a particular strategy. And our Affordable Housing Special Revenue Fund. The town in 2007 established the Affordable Housing Fund. In the early years, revenue was limited to the occasional payment in lieu that we received in interest earnings. The fund for years was underfunded and underutilized. In 2017 and 18, $1.35 million in fund balance and some funds from the general fund were transferred into the Affordable Housing Fund. And that year was the first year that the town was able to engage in larger projects. The first one was land banking with CASA to build Perry Place. And the second was an acquisition of the first permanently affordable unit in Carrboro by partnering with Community Home Trust. Beginning in 2019, the Town Council passed a series of half-penny property tax increases. And with this new dedicated revenue stream, the number of units preserved and acquired began to rise. And this slide is really to give you a visual of the impact of increased funding and the number of units that have been provided through that. Looking at projects that the Affordable Housing Fund has funded, households The grants for affordable housing projects are prioritizing benefits to people who have been the most cost burdened in our community or who have been the most historically disadvantaged. The majority of our projects have supported Black households, 59%. I suspect a lot of this is coming from critical repairs and weatherization of existing homes and assisting our longtime homeowners in our community maintain their home and to be able to age in place. A combined 97% of the projects supported households who earned 60% AMI or less. However, we do know that the housing that is most extremely the hardest really to produce is for households who are extremely low income, who are earning 30% AMI or less. This is just a snapshot of some of our progress to date. The Affordable Housing Fund, $4.72 million was budgeted for projects and $3.42 million has been expended. We have 243 existing affordable units within Carrboro. The Affordable Housing Fund has added 104 and preserved 79. And then an additional 59 units have been added via the planning process. We have between 80 and 90 units in the pipeline, and most of that is the upcoming Habitat for Humanity project on Rogers Road. Through mostly federal funds, 385 households have received emergency housing assistance, primarily through during the pandemic years. And then we have provided $1.24 million to community partnerships such as Community Home Trust, the Home Consortium, and the Orange County Partnership to End Homelessness. And there's just a slide to show you our community partners. So recommendations. The first recommendation that I have is to allocate funds for an affordable housing plan. I am suggesting $125,000 for this after doing some market research. Hiring a consultant to develop the town's first comprehensive affordable housing plan will give us some updated data in Carrboro. It will help us determine which are the best tools and strategies we should be using in our particular community. It will give us a chance to engage local stakeholders and Carrboro residents more in affordable housing. And I think it would give us a nice blueprint for an affordable housing bond, which is a priority project within the comprehensive campaign, within the comprehensive plan. And finally, we can establish goals that are based on the town's twin pillars. Second is to increase funding for the Affordable Housing Fund. I'm recommending $192,500, and this could fund two proposed new initiatives. The first would be long-time homeowner tax assistance relief, especially given how much the property taxes are going to rise. I think that this is very important for some of our elderly homeowners in the area in particular. And then to pilot a down payment assistance program. The second recommendation I have is to increase the payment in lieu fee, and I think that this is something that everyone has wanted to see. I'm suggesting a new calculation that would encourage more unit creation. It's called the affordability gap, and it's used very commonly throughout the country, and it's very simple to understand. You take the median home price and you subtract the median affordable home price, and you adjust that figure annually. So if we were to do this, you would see that our fee would increase from $54,000 to over $191,000. And finally, land banking and land use. I think we have a good opportunity to look at our inventory again and look at the criteria that had been used to evaluate it. I'm recommending that we set aside $600,000 for future land banking efforts. And this number is coming from an allocation for empowerment for their Homestead Road project. That project has fallen through because they could not raise the amount of funding that they needed to close on the property. So I'd like to, in the spirit that those funds were allocated, I would like to see if we can set those funds aside for future land banking efforts. I think it's very timely, given our partnership with Central Pines and the Affordable Housing Coalition Land Study Project. We also need to just keep relationships with our manufactured home parks and continue preserving NOAA units. And our UDO rewrite can potentially provide us with some strategies that would also make it easier to build more housing in Carrboro in general, and perhaps provide some strategies that are provide more of an incentive for affordable housing development. And that is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Anne Marie, for the presentation and the really great recommendations for the council to consider. Council members, are there questions? I see Councilmember Frey and then Councilmember Posada, and then Councilmember Palmer.
All right. Anne Marie, thank you for the work that went into this. I have got quite a few questions.
Oh, boy.
So I'll just get started. And
Wonderful.
I will also note, I don't want to just monologue this, so if folks want to tag in, I'm happy to yield back and come around again so I don't talk all the time.
Yeah, whatever you feel comfortable doing.
Okay, if I could start with the Pathway and Crest Street report. I just wanted to get a little bit more information. So we had the report last June. Could you let me know what other staff work went into compiling the recommendations between the report that we received last June and today?
The staff memo outlined the staff members who did review it. It was Trish, the former planning director, the former stormwater director, the current stormwater manager. Trying to remember. Let me pull up my memo so I don't misspeak,
Sure,
because
no
we've
rush.
had some staff changes. Yes. Marie Parker reviewed it. Laura Janway for environmental sustainability, and I reviewed it. Additionally, we shared the report with Sungate Design, particularly wanting to get their feedback on the stormwater analysis section. And then I spoke to the VP of Construction at Habitat for Humanity just to get a kind of a high-level developer's perspective of what this property looks like. How appealing is this property for affordable housing development?
Thank you, that makes sense. I know that Trish isn't here to be able to answer this question, so I don't know if Marie feels able to weigh in at all, but I was wondering to what extent in putting together that staff memo, staff tried to put any ballpark numbers to that. Like, as an example, knowing what our UDO right now requires in terms of stormwater, figuring out what some of the options might have been for expensive.
That was part of the challenge and part of the reason why this recommendation came about. More work would have been required on the Pathway property to really get a handle on what that property could really do in terms of rock slope and stormwater. I think it would need a more thorough stormwater analysis. Just anecdotally from my conversations, I think that a robust stormwater system would need to be used. And certainly, any developer would not want to create more of a runoff problem that the neighbors are currently facing. So we would have to look at making that property overall healthier. So that was part of it. And with limited funds, exploring that property further at this time just doesn't seem the most prudent way to move forward. We do have other properties that we can look at. We may have some other properties that are arising, and it seems like the best course of action would be that these properties go to the bottom of our list for now, and we keep moving forward on other opportunities where the outcome, we would know better. We would know that yes, that property is really good for development. We can estimate what the cost would be just based on the assessment. There were so many unknowns in this that it was really hard to kind of guess that.
Councilmember Frey, I'm sorry. So the properties that we actually were looking at, which was Pathway Drive here in Crest Street, so these were not good selections from the beginning? Because I heard you say move them to the bottom where there's some more viable
I think
than
be-
this, and
I
why
think-
didn't we just do that from the
I
beginning?
think because we didn't quite realize how much extra work would be needed to evaluate them, but they were, at the time of the selection, on paper, the best-looking properties that the council at the time made. Going to the bottom of the list is meaning let other properties rise up the list. It's not a comment on the initial decision. It is just a queue movement.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Oh, go ahead.
Thank you, Councilmember.
I don't want to call, like I said, I don't want to hog the space.
Thank you, Councilmember Frey, and I usually don't jump in, but thank you for opening the door to this. I'm trying to grasp, as far as some of the unknowns. I remember the report and remember that there was, and then I do remember the comment that Councilmember Now mentioned around, is this what we want to move forward? And I think there were some also questions lying for some of us on that dais at that moment. What are some of the things that would help make a decision? Like, what are some of the unknowns that maybe could have been put as we look into different properties, right? So I'm also on the thought, if we're moving to other properties, let's use this as a learning opportunity.
Yes.
So
yes.
what are the things that we would have been good to know or be good to put in a report in order to make a more solid recommendation? Not that the recommendation isn't solid, but something to put some figures into it and make it more accessible to do that.
I can certainly provide comments from all of the reviewers, particularly revolving around stormwater, and we are going to have the meeting with Summit Design to get everything straightened on paper about all the comments that the staff has had, as well as some of the questions about some of the results and some of the methods that were used. So I think that before we do this again, that we are a little bit more thorough in writing the RFQ to really spell out what we need for the stormwater analysis, particularly if we have some foreknowledge of the property. I think the question with this property was, in order to pay for a complicated stormwater control system, you need to have the amount of density to kind of make the money work. And I just am not sure that would have worked in this case too, from my conversations with other people. And so again, it is a question of how best do we use our funds right now. Do we continue further exploring the property and go towards an unknown result? But certainly with Crest Street, there's so little land there that just seems impossible. 3 acres would just, 3 acres on Pathway Drive, I think would just depend on how difficult things are to install out there in terms of the water, sewer, and then road access, and the rock, and the slope, and understanding the stormwater situation.
That's good to know. Thank you for that. So I think one of my biggest takeaways, at least from this piece, is that RFQ. And maybe as we look at other properties, I really want to make sure that we're taking the lessons learned from this one, because I do know that there's been significant investment and comments and conversations and misinformation out there about what this property really is and where it's moving and how it's moving, when we really were just evaluating the property. No plans were made.
Exactly.
Nothing was planned to be created. It was evaluation, and even the simple evaluation gave a lot of heartache to people, right? And I understand that. But as we move forward, I want to make sure that as we evaluate other properties, let's take the lessons learned from this one so that we can create a more concrete report what from comes back as we evaluate other properties. So even if there's some folks in community who don't want us to evaluate a property, at least we have something to walk away with that's a little bit more firm. But I do thank all the staff and everyone who's been working on this report and for all the work that has been done on this. Councilmember Frey.
Thank you so much. Let me think where I'm going with this. Emery, do you happen to know, in the course of evaluating the pathway parcels, there are 2 of them? 3, right? But there's one that's on the opposite side of Pathway Drive from the rest. And having been out there, I know that the sort of slope and stone conditions were evaluated in aggregate. Did the staff memo take into account any smaller subdivisions? In other words, thinking about not just the maximum possible buildable area that Sungate had identified, but thinking, okay, well, are some of these, if we think of this in subsections, if we say, okay, well, this particular slope we can see is really challenging, but not the whole property doesn't have the same slope.
It was briefly discussed. Again, there are the variables of what would need to be done out there, and if you are looking at a smaller area, the less units you get, the less cost offset that you're going to receive.
Okay. I think just to pick up something that Councilmember Posada said, I would hope that as we're learning from this, that when we get future reports back on feasibility for properties, and this is obviously not all of the parties that wrote the staff memo are here, so this is not aimed at anybody in particular, but it would be really good when we have a finding on this that we at least have an attempt to estimate costs quantitatively, because expensive means different things to different people in different contexts. It's not really giving us a ton to work with. I would hope that in a future reports we would actually have a quantitative, even if it's a large range, it helps to have a sense for, are we talking hundreds of thousands? Are we talking millions? Are we talking tens of millions? Just an order of magnitude can be really helpful. Okay. So going from there, I think you were actually starting to make a segue that's really good. So you're talking about looking at town land again.
Yes.
I had the impression when we got, not even me, I don't think I was even on council at this point, but when the last list of town-owned properties came out, I had the impression that these were the only parcels of town-owned land that were considered feasible at all.
Right.
Now, that's my question. I think that's my question, Madam Mayor, is this about these were considered the best, or these were considered the best under a very specific set of criteria that maybe we need to revisit, or is it that these were the only ones that were considered feasible? I'm sort of, you mentioned as an idea going back through and reevaluating the town-owned land. I guess my question is what might be different?
They were, and I wasn't here at the time, but they rose up because of the criteria that they were looked against. They weren't the only properties, but I think also the potential for density was also another factor that helped them rise above. And so my suggestion is to reevaluate the properties again, since this was done maybe in 2015 or so. Have a new set of eyes, really look at it, look at the criteria that was used to do a high-level evaluation of the properties, and I believe that that's what was done at the time. And those 2 parcels were the ones that came to the top. But there might be more opportunity, perhaps some uses for other properties in our inventory are no longer needed for the purpose that we had intended. I think that there is room to see what else we have.
You've been working with, you mentioned the Orange County Affordable Housing Coalition with a lot of partners, Central Pines. Do you have the sense whether there are any nonprofit partners who might be interested in these properties themselves?
They are part of the team that's looking at the properties, and the project is really just kicked off. The idea is to really do a full assessment of all properties within Orange County, including ownership, size, and create a living database to provide information about each parcel in there. We're just getting started, but I think the database might be ready in the fall. So that also might provide us a little bit more information. But yes, there are nonprofit partners around the table. There is a for-profit developer around the table as well. So hopefully there will be some information to report in the fall.
Okay, thanks for that. Is that limited to properties owned by the parties to the study, or are they're looking at property broadly speaking in Orange County to try and identify, for instance, good targets for land banking?
Exactly.
Okay.
Good targets for land banking.
All right, sounds good.
And highlighting at first owners such as universities who might be more interested in partnering with us, or churches, for example.
All right. I was really happy to see you recommend the tax relief program. I think that's going to be important this year and makes a lot of sense. So I think I'm coming here to your recommendations. Is the idea that by hiring a consultant, we would go from where we are today, which is we don't actually have a plan for affordable housing, to taking something that would align with the comprehensive plan that would drive, I'm sorry, did I hear you say an affordable housing bond? Or what's the purpose of bringing someone in to do a professional plan versus, for instance, considering staffing needs in the department to create and execute on a series of plans?
I think that the comprehensive plan and the affordable housing chapter, while good, it's very generalized, and I think that having, for the first time, an affordable housing plan, especially as the UDO rewrite is going on, would be very helpful for us to get solid numbers. For instance, if we are going down payment assistance, well, how much do we really need? Let's look at the numbers. How much would be good? An affordable housing bond was one of the strategies that was highlighted within the comprehensive plan and is considered a priority project. Having a consultant really look at that, look at the community, would help us determine how much might be needed to do what we would like to do with our gap. So it really is to get something that's more specific, that is really housing related and not part of an overall plan, but still complements and folds into that plan.
Thank you. So I think that leads into a question I was going to ask. I was going to say, you've given us the recommendations for this, which I think are going to flow into your items for this year's budget.
Yes.
And what I was sort of getting at is, do you think that this is a sufficiently sized down payment on actually closing that gap in the near term? And I think what I've heard you say is the answer is we don't actually know, and that's where you're going with that.
Right, exactly.
One tiny question. So the $600K for land banking, this is related to possibly scooping up the lot that Empowerment did not close on? Is that right?
That was the lot that they didn't close on. It's still available as far as I know. I think the $600,000 can be used for any opportunity that would come along that would make a lot of sense for us expanding affordable housing and the number of units, the most possible units that we could get.
Can I piggyback on
Yeah, go for it.
So the allocating for a plan, a thing that immediately occurred to me, if we're trying to time it with the UDO, is that delivery of that in March rather than June of next year would align it with our budget process for the following year and implementation of the UDO. How feasible does that sound to you, to have delivery of a project like that on that timeline instead?
On that timeline? Is it an 18-month timeline? Is that, I'm trying to...
Well, it depends on the turnaround time to actually
Yeah.
bid that out, but
Would be 12.
I mean, I would think that that would be feasible.
If I'm understanding you right, you're suggesting you would want that in 12 months from now.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. I think we
Knowing
could
that we're gonna
begin
lose a
the
month or two.
process, it would get
Yeah.
down to, I mean, how much we contract with initially would be an issue, and the budget itself. I think it's feasible in looking at other towns that have done this, other cities that have done this. I have seen 9-month timeframes for this, so it is possible. If that's the timeline that council would like to pursue, we can look into it more and see if it is feasible.
Thanks. I really want to echo that because the community indicators that you've given us are basically a blinking sign that's like, we're on fire. So
Yeah.
I know we've got to prioritize across our different areas, but I think you may find that the council's answer to how fast we should do these things is,
Yesterday?
yes.
Okay.
Okay, just to come back to my last little question. So I know that if I remember correctly, we made an award to Empowerment to help kick in towards acquiring that lot. Is that right?
Yes, it was, I believe, 9 acres and then 10 units of existing rental properties.
Do you know what happened what happens to the amount that we had offered? Since they didn't close, does that come back to the fund?
They had not closed on it. They were unable to raise the remaining amount that they needed to purchase the property. The funds are still with us. We would not have transferred the funds until an actual closing date, so they are with us. It's the same situation in Orange County, which also contributed, I believe, $800,000 towards the project. They are going to open up those funds again.
Okay, got it. I think that's it. Thank you, everybody, for your patience.
Thank you, Councilmember Frey. Covered a couple of my questions. Councilmember,
I'll try.
excuse me. This is a work session, so let's be orderly. Anne Marie, could you please speak
Lean in a little
closer
bit
to the
more.
microphone? Thank you. Yes. Councilmember Palmer, did you have something else?
I think most of my questions got answered with that. Especially the question about whether it's existing property or whether it's considering all properties. So thank you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you so
Madam Mayor.
much, Councilmember Palmer. Councilmember Haven O'Donnell, Posada, and then, no, actually, Councilmember Haven O'Donnell now, and then Posada.
Thank you for this. Thank you for this report. It's excellent. It's, real down to earth and pragmatic. I really appreciate that. I want to understand, well, let me back up and say I appreciate the thoroughness of your work on this and to go back and to look at all of the information right from the start of the interest in the sites. And I appreciate the sensibility of the staff in the recommendations made, sensibility and wisdom. I want to know that the stormwater regulations that were looked at, and I wanted to bring my copy of the summit report, but was that based on a 25-year?
I believe
Flood-
it was. I believe it was.
Yeah,
And
that's-
that was probably one of the issues that was highlighted.
Precisely. And so to tag on to what Councilmember Posada was saying, I think it begs the question with the UDO going forward, we need to move up to 500 years. And I want to emphasize that because it could get lost. This is a real teachable moment about why we need to have stormwater regulations that are, that really face the stormwater incidence and frequency and intensity that we now have. So I want to bring out that point. The other point I wanted to ask about, so I want to understand the numbers better. And I don't know, maybe this is actually a recommendation to staff going forward. Maybe it's not really for tonight. But I'd like to be able to understand the Affordable Housing Special Use Fund. How much is in that fund right now?
I believe our finance director said that there's a fund balance of $500,000 at the moment.
Okay.
Does that sound correct, Manager Tony? Okay.
And so the potential 600,000 that would have gone to empowerment is also available?
It's not within the fund at this point, but it is within a special line. These are former ARPA funds, but it's not within the fund at this point.
Exactly. So is it possible that those funds could be transferred and amassed together?
I'm going to ask our manager. Okay.
It's possible.
There we are.
Okay. Well,
Brandy?
Yeah.
well, I'm trying to get a holistic view of, how much money is there in different pockets
Yeah.
that can
Yeah.
be put together, because I'm anticipating that the number of folks who are going to need tax relief and other supports is going to go up. We don't even know what that's going to look like. I got calls today from people who had received their tax valuations, and one of the folks who called me, now that's valuation, it's not what their tax bill will be, but the valuation went up 72%. 72%. That's not including AWASA, that's not including, all of the other costs that are rising exponentially for our citizens. So what I would like to see, if we could have some printout, and it's the way you constructed this so well that I could visualize doing something where it shows the different pockets of money that could possibly be available, and then the different ways that you've recommended that the housing burden could be addressed, if that makes sense. Because I feel like it's also spread out, that it's very hard to look at the problem solving. I think your slide between the renters and the owners, I think that best,
Could you put that slide up?
yeah, that'd be
I'm
great.
looking for
That
it.
sets the filter for which to look at how the housing dollars could be addressing needs.
Oh, here.
This one?
Is this the one?
No,
No.
it's the one, it's a
after?
chart.
Oh, the housing gap. Is it the housing gap?
That
Might
one.
be. This
Councilmember
one.
Haven O'Donnell, a quick
That
thought
one.
for you.
Yeah.
If the other amount of money that we're talking about is ARPA funds, we may or may not be able to reallocate that. That clock is ticked.
That, I know, that's why I'm just asking that we look into it and see what's possible. And if there are any other funds that we're not thinking of. In addition to looking at what the county has, and just so that we know how much the county
Yeah.
has that could be moved around. Thanks, I appreciate that.
Thank you, Councilmember Haven O'Donnell. Mayor Pro Tem now and Councilmember Posada.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much, Anne Marie. So just kind of one quick clarifying question for me. So these properties will presumably go into this matrix that the partnership is looking at. Again, it could be that nonprofit partners may reevaluate these properties among many others, and we could presume that they are among the least desirable, but they're going to sort of be on that list still for, consideration for land banking among the partners?
The database that I mentioned?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that all town-owned lands across, the county, Chapel Hill, Hillsborough will be included. It's just in one comprehensive database with as much detail on the geographical possible limitations that the site might have, indicating if there is a stream buffer, et cetera, just to get as much robust information as we can.
The thought occurs particularly with Crest Street and particularly with Pee Wee Homes. You know, if there is a partner that could maybe make use of 0.26 acres, they come to mind. Of course, that's one hypothetical pulled out of the air, but it was something that had occurred to me. So I wanted to make sure they got a crack at it. And then, you know, the rest of these recommendations are great. I really am so grateful to you for the work. And to the rest of the staff who put them together. This is a really big step. You know, what I can, it's a little bit dispiriting to contemplate the scope of this problem. And so it is a comfort to know that we have a 2-year plan to better, and then to much better, hopefully within the second year. I quite appreciate Councilmember Palmer's point about trying to make sure we align that plan with the 26 budget. This gives us a direction that we haven't had and that I'm extremely grateful for. I find myself a little bit frustrated with the pathway, you know, decision-making particularly. You know, we have known sort of almost all of this since as soon as we read the report. And the question of whether, like, you know, there was never a question of whether there was going to need to be expensive stormwater management. That was a yes. And there has never been a question of whether this would be profitable. That was a no. And so I ask about the list of properties with the idea in mind that, you know, I raising and maybe specifying a little bit what Councilmember Frey was talking about. I think we really need a framework for like standardized numbers here, and not just like specific numbers on this particular project. You know, long-time listener, fan of the program, Patrick McDonough from Raven Street, has written into us about the concept of residual land value, a model that I found really persuasive. I think the idea of identifying what the market is doing in a given area and identifying the gap between, you know, the value of the land and what the town would need to come up with to make it make sense for a developer. In short, you know, if we're going to be beginning to develop a land banking gap financing project, we are going to need, with every single parcel that we evaluate, the numbers that would qualify that for the program. And that was what I was hoping to have this evening. And so, you know, that to me, this has always been a reasonable outcome, and I think we've been clear-eyed about that. But I think we want to make sure that in the future we aren't making these decisions based on generalities, hypotheticals, and, you know, comparisons that we don't have a baseline for. So I do want to, you know, again, I think there's 1,097 units. In our wildest dreams, we were not taking a big bite out of that with this project, and so I don't want to over-index on that. And I do think the headline here tonight is that we have a clarity of direction and purpose that we have lacked for a long time, and that it's really great. But I do think that we kind of owe, you know, these discussions are really difficult with residents because it's so hard to have those specifics at hand. You know, when you start to talk about a particular parcel, as we're gonna with every parcel has neighbors, and every neighbor is gonna want answers. And I think that it is just one of those things that will really help us with trust, transparency, the ability to get these kinds of projects done, to not find ourselves in the position, even that we still are tonight. You know, I think the overall recommendation seems solid, the reasoning more than solid. But I hope in the future that we have slightly more specific grounds to make it.
I think within the next RFQ, we can have more detail and have a more thorough, not just a high-level view of those properties, but go in there with a deeper understanding of what we already are seeing as potential issues so that we can specifically ask for certain things to be assessed.
Thank you. Well, because I guess, just to sort of say for anybody who might be listening is, the question then is really for us, of, how much do we want to lose? How much is it worth it to us, not to the market? But I think what we still haven't answered tonight is how much might this have been worth in dollars to us to pursue? And, I don't think that the answer probably was $7.5 million or whatever for 3 units. But we need that answer for, and we understand as a council that, literally every single time we are going to be taking on the market, we need to be spending capital. And sort of our understanding of how much capital that's worth it to us for our values is something that is still sort of outside of our grasp here. But otherwise, I think, particularly the land bank plan, the $600,000, the fee recommended price for the consultant, that's not too high. We have a 2-year plan to much better, and I do think that's the headline. And I don't want my frustration to cloud that or my gratitude. Thank you.
Okay, then who this? Oh, go ahead, Councilman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I want to start off with saying, again, thank you, Anne Marie, with you, the team, everyone who's worked on this. I also don't want to let my frustration on one piece of it cloud just the immense work that has gone into this whole thing, into this whole presentation and everything that y'all do, specifically in your team every day when we're looking at trying to find homes for people. I've seen you personally call and meet people outside and do whatever you need to do and go out of your way to help folks. So just want to say thank you for everything you do and kind of start off with that. Again, very excited about the recommendations. I just had a couple of clarifying questions, right? So on the increased funding one, on the increasing the payment in lieu one, 38, well, sorry, in my packet. So I like this. I've been wanting to increase the payment in lieu ever.
Yeah.
Now, question, and maybe this is for you or someone else, how quickly can we get moving on this?
Typically, it's been aligned with the budget, but I'm going to defer to, budget.
Okay, perfect. Great. It becomes part of the budget. All right, cool. Well, that answers my question. And I think this is what I would been waiting for a couple of years. Something concretely gives us a way of finding a new payment in lieu that is more adequate than what we have. We always want to say we want to increase it. We want something different. We want something that actually incentivizes this. So I do say thanks for bringing this metric to us because that helps us kind of really put a formula. And so thank you for that. And one that I understand. I know that there's some out there already, but I don't get it. This one's just simpler. So thank you for that. And then I just wanted to clarify on the 600, it's my understanding, and my memory's not great, that when we approved that, it was coming out of the general fund, or, right? It wasn't a special allocation through ARPA. I think did I get that right?
It was initially ARPA funded. We did revenue replacement, and so it's general fund at this point.
Gotcha. Okay, that helps me understand that piece because I was wondering what limitations are with this. Because I am very much in support of holding that, finding any property that makes sense for us to buy. And I know that things are changing. Properties go on sale and get sold within the day sometimes. So we want to make sure that we do give staff the flexibility and I don't know how to say nimble in an action way, but be able to be nimble about, moving some funds that we've already thought about in this kind of format. I know that I imagine there would be a process where things have to come back or some kind of a review process, but I'm very much in line and would love to see that initial investment that we were already putting into acquiring property, not us, but one of our partners, to continue in the land acquirement kind of piece, whatever that looks like for affordable housing. So again, I thank you for that piece. And I will, then some of the other questions I had have already been answered. Just again, thank you for all the work you do. Madam Mayor.
Councilmember Palmer.
Yeah, and I'll echo that. Thanks. There's a lot here and a lot to dive into. I just wanted to piggyback on that payment in lieu question, and this is a question first for you, but then for my peers. When our peer towns have implemented a new formula like this, and I note here that this is like about 3 times, almost, right? This much of a jump, have they phased it? What has the market impact been? What have our peers done? How has that gone? Is the question to you.
I haven't, in our research, and we did national research, we haven't seen phased in necessarily. This particular method, I did create a slide just to show you some different methods and what they would yield, so I can, if you can read that, it's right up there. Beginning with, on the left-hand side, how we currently figure out our fee. Affordability gap is really the easiest to explain, and it's used by comparable or smaller cities. Santa Fe, not that it's comparable, but it's one area that uses it. There's several towns in California. They all have, which I should look at my screen right in front of me. The production cost subsidy requires gathering information. I think the way Chapel Hill does it, if that's the one that they use, that they are getting information from nonprofit builders annually to try to figure it out. Now, I think they're probably looking at their method of payment in lieu as well. One thing that an affordable housing plan, also in conjunction with the UDO, I think will tell us, is this the best method? But to get this going, which is what I have heard from council, this is a straightforward effort. And remember that we cannot enforce this. We are voluntary inclusionary, so if someone walks away from it, then they walk away from it. But that's where, something like conditional zoning would pop in, where there is a little bit of leverage there. I think that the price needs to be large enough to give someone pause about just writing the check and considering the unit, so.
Yeah,
Can I jump into this discussion here?
Yes, please.
I'm glad it comes up, Anne Marie, and your point is really well taken, and I think that turning it into a little bit more of a stick is highly desirable.
Yeah.
Because ultimately we want the unit.
Yes.
My fear here, colleagues, is that right now the units are so difficult and so onerous to build that until we have our UGO, so I think, for instance, of like the what are we calling the Zen project on Homestead right now? Where that's zoned by right for large single-family homes. We get some accommodation because it's within reach at present. But our ordinance is really working against us getting actual units there. If they were zoned to build fourplexes there, then the units become much cheaper as an issue of scale for them to build than $191,000 per. So my fear is, in the interim, if we do this right now, this budget season, we are driving people to do what they are zoned by right, and we will have a lag period of, McMansions and estate farms, rather than getting even our currently sort of like a half measure of a too small payment in lieu. That's just something that comes to mind that I wanted to put out there. Something that, I know that we're not going to take action tonight or anything, but as we go into the budget season, thinking about that would be a concern for me.
Thank you for that, Mayor Pro Tem. Councilman Paul.
That covered it. You stated it better than I could. Yeah.
So I think we, council members, have been asked to provide feedback, have the opportunity to ask questions, and in general, just receive this information. Is there anything further for Anne Marie as it relates to probably the recommendations? Councilmember Frey and then Posada.
Madam Mayor, and I'm not sure I think this is not really, Anne Marie, directed primarily at you. I think I'm mainly looking at our town manager, because I know I know, Patrice, how much you enjoy metrics, and looking at this gap, I see a couple of metrics popping out here that would be really helpful as we're making these decisions, where one is progress towards closing that gap. Now, I'm not trying to back us into a corner where we have to do a big, expensive gap study in order to produce that metric, but figuring out how do we measure reasonably annually our actual progress towards closing that gap? How do we know that we're making progress? Because if we are looking at a budget, for instance, for housing, hopefully when we get all of this rolling and up on an even keel, it should come with the goal for this budget is to make this progress towards closing the gap. And then I think the other one, I just really want to echo something that I believe Mayor Pro Tem Now said a moment ago about if we are reporting on the feasibility of a project, that it should come with a consistent metric from parcel to parcel. And that might be, for instance, expected cost per affordable unit or something like that. But something that's comparable so that if we are looking at a small parcel, we can compare that feasibly with a larger parcel. Because just because a parcel yields only one affordable unit doesn't mean we shouldn't build an affordable unit. But if it is a much more expensive affordable unit, then that same unit would be somewhere else, then that sort of makes a difference. Otherwise, as we're looking at, we are going to increasingly be looking at less and less desirable parcels for this, because flat, empty land in downtown Carrboro doesn't exist. And there are just very few parcels coming up in general. So if we're going to be looking at that, we want to be able to, as quickly as possible, create some kind of replicable assessment so that we've got apples to apples across these parcels as we're going forward. So hopefully we're not reinventing the wheel on the next one. Just that to say. So, Emery, I don't think that was aimed at you at all in this. I'm just thinking out loud about where we would want to go with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And, as we think about, and I think I'm going to go back to the payment in lieu piece as we think about that, and I think I'm interested in getting more information, if some exists or some kind of projections exist, about if we go ahead and move forward with this year, is there a way to calculate what that impact might be on projects coming up? Because we already have this conversation when people are already building beyond building by right. No, these conversations don't happen because people want to just build, and that one they're just looking at how to make a bigger buck, and they can make more money by making more buildings or houses or whatever. So, and I don't know how that information might come up or like what other things, but I'm very interested in it because I think this is something that is a long time in need. And if we find, or there's conversation that happens that gives us a little bit more clarity around that, because I get the kind of tension. I don't necessarily know how much I'm worried about that myself. But again, I want to be informed a little bit more about this piece. So yeah, that's the only ask that I would have as we go into the budget season, to get a little bit more information around that piece.
Definitely.
Thanks.
Councilmember Hagan O'Donnell, you have a question?
Yeah, Anne Marie, I wanted to ask about the current list and whether or not, through some of the new conversations that are taking place with CPRC and UNC, and, whether or not, parcels like the old 86 and Homestead, that was the impairment parcel, is now on the list, or whether conversation with Orange County has taken place for any parcel in part of Twin Creeks Park, which is immediately adjacent to schools and neighborhoods. So,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Very cursory conversations around the Homestead Road piece. I do not know, I don't think it's on the market at the moment, but I have been talking to the housing director over there just to sort of gauge their interest. Of course, it doesn't have sewer at this point, so that is a huge drawback to it, but it is, it's good land. So, yeah, that's my answer. We're going to keep talking about that.
So is there a wish list? And if if there is even a short wish list of 5 potential, would you share that with us?
Okay.
Yeah.
Nothing else,
I love that you have this slide for us. This is great. Thank you.
Councilmember Palmer. So looks, oh, Councilmember Frey
Sorry,
has one
Madam
more
Mayor,
thing.
one quick
It's fine.
note, which is that if Anne Marie shares any listings with us, we want to make sure that that's not shared outside of the council. Because if a parcel is potentially up for land banking, we don't want to be driving up the cost of land banking by spreading it around too far, yeah? Thanks.
Thank you for that, Councilmember Frey. So again, thank you, Anne Marie, for the presentation, the great recommendations. Thank you, community members who have been very engaged around this issue. We have received your emails, and just your engagement around it. We really appreciate. And also would appreciate some ideas about some sites for affordable housing. I did see that in some of our emails. And it was never the intent of this council nor town staff to have you be anxious about anything. We just needed to do our due diligence and to get to this point, and we're at that point now where we are not going to pursue the parcels on Pathway nor Crest Street, but it was never the intent to create any angst for our community members. We just needed to do our due diligence to get to this point. And so I did want to share that with all of you. Please communicate with us as you get ideas. Communicate with Anne Marie, and we appreciate you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think, Anne Marie, you can sit down and drink some water, eat some candy. You did good. We'll let community members go ahead and get out.
Move into it and take a
Like
back.
a 5-minute,
All right.
7-minute break. As community members are leaving, I'll entertain a motion to go into closed session.
Moved.
Second.
Attorney-client privilege. I don't anticipate a vote going back into open session. I don't anticipate one. So we'll just take a 5 to 7 minute recess, bathroom, water, breathe, whatever you need to do.